Darren's going first, right?
No, we're going in the order in the program.
Dick's first. Perfect.
Before we start, just as
Thank
we
you.
are switching from your computer to your slides, either this holding slide or the question holding slide will pop up as we're switching. So just want you to be like, that's in my slide. It's coming.
So you know Christakis, Bob Putnam.
I can ask.
I don't know if I can avoid people like that.
For you have a handheld. So if you want to have it, but let me ask.
Thank you. Please, can everybody grab their coffee and sit down, please? We got a minute, so. Great to see you all, by the way. Thank you so much. This is, well, that was the plan, to try and be amazing, and I'm amazed by you guys too. So.
You are the sort of the three main.
Well, I'm just trying. You know, tomorrow, and you've got all these. I mean, you're going to hear from pediatricians. They're amazing. I mean, I told you the story about the pediatrician who told me about the mother who was feeding her baby, and the friends were all telling her, you've got to use this thing on the media. And she said, the child's choking. She said, but I can't stop doing it because the other people. And the pediatrician said, but your child's choking. Right? And I was like, she's like, I'm going to slap you. The only choice I have is to slap you. What? I know. Oh, it's fine. I know. It's fine. Thank you. Right, let's go. Well, here we are again. We've had economists. We've had psychologists. And now we turn to the ones who'll tell us about the history and the sociology and the social connections. And so we have three great professors going to come and talk to us. Nick Christakis from Yale, sociologist, famous chap to have around. Locally lives here. We're pleased to have him. Didn't cost me much to get him here, so that was great. Darrin is a professor of history, and we've known each other for some considerable time, and he and I were in Scotland last year celebrating the 250th of Adam Smith. And then D. Graham Burnett from Princeton going to talk to us about attention. So we're going to talk about social connections, isolation and loneliness, and attention. Take it away, panel. Thank you. Yes, please. Please. You need help. You're good.
So I was just asked to put a few ideas on the table, some empirical work that we've been doing. And I wanted to start by just framing this with a very basic observation that social interactions are a biosocial phenomenon. They have biological predicates, and they have physical and mental health consequences. And I want to share just three empirical findings regarding social contagion and mental health based on our work that are of possible relevance to this meeting. So first of all, when humans have emotions, we show them. Why? Why do we show our emotions? It's not hard to construct an argument from evolutionary biology as to why it would enhance our fitness to experience emotions, why it would be good for our survival to be able to experience anger or happiness or fear or disgust. But we not only feel those emotions, we show them. And we not only show them, but you can read them. And you don't only read them, but you copy them. So it would seem that emotional contagion is a very deep and fundamental aspect of human emotional experience. And in fact, this function of emotions suggests that whatever other advantages they offer, they are also a primitive form of communication. And I suspect that emotions radically preceded language. That we initially, one of the reasons we have emotions is to communicate to others. I see the lion, I show fear on my face. You can't see the lion, but you can see my fear, and so you gain some information about the presence of a lion by that display on my face. Now, we're accustomed to thinking about emotional contagion as fleeting and involving just pairs of people. So a few years ago, I was giving a talk about some of this research in New York City, and I said, you know when you're on the subway and the person across the car from you smiles at you, and you just instinctively smile back? And they said, we don't do that in New York City. And I said, well, everywhere else in the world, that's normal human behavior. Someone smiles at you, just smile at them. But of course, emotional contagion can be broader still. And this was one of our first images that we made to study emotional contagion in human social networks. Here, this is a network image. Every dot is a person. Every line is a relationship between two people, whose friend, whose coworker, whose sibling, whose spouse, and so on. And we color the dots according to how happy people are using a psychometric test of happiness. And the yellow dots are happy people, and the blue dots are sad people, and the green dots are in between. And if you look at this image, you might immediately visually begin to see some things. Like there are clusters of happy and unhappy people within the social fabric. Actually, these clusters go out to 3 degrees of separation. So there's a relationship between your happiness and your friend's happiness and your friend's friend's happiness and your friend's 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 happiness or unhappiness, for example. Second, you might notice that the geodesic, that in the network location of the happy and unhappy people vary, that the blue unhappy people are more likely to be on the periphery of the network, more socially isolated within this structure. And various analyses that we conducted indicated that it isn't just the case that happy people preferentially hang out with other happy people, or that clusters of interconnected people share exposures that make them all happy at the same time, but also we found that there was evidence for social contagion in the emotional states within these social networks, and as I said, extending out to 3 degrees of separation. And in the last 20 years, my laboratory has done many, many experiments looking at social contagion online with tens of thousands of people, in field experiments in Honduras, in India, in Uganda, and other places around the world. I'm just going to show you a couple of our online experiments more narrowly focused on happiness before moving on to a couple of other findings, and then I'll stop. So here's one experimental paradigm of ours, and actually David and Jean both alluded to some aspects of this that I'll discuss right now. Here in this experimental paradigm, we recruited online research subjects. We dropped them into networks whose structure we engineered, and we gave them a little bit of money and to play what's known in economics as a public goods game. So each person gets a little reserve if they contribute money to their, and we introduce them to their neighbors. So each person gets assigned some neighbors. And we say, okay, if you contribute $1 to your neighbors, we'll double that. It'll be divided amongst your neighbors. And then you'll only get a fraction of that. So I have $1. I have 4 neighbors. I have 3 neighbors, rather. It gets doubled to $2. Every neighbor, including me, gets 50 cents. The group benefits, but I've given $1 and only gotten back 50 cents. So I have to make a sacrifice. I have to act altruistically. And obviously, what's optimal is if everyone contributes maximally, the group benefits the most. But of course, you can intuit everyone is tempted to cheat and be lazy and freeload and not contribute and hope that everyone else contributes. Now, what we were interested in this experiment was in the causes and consequences of economic inequality. And we wanted to approach the problem experimentally. So what we did in this experiment is we manipulated the amount of money in these societies was fixed, but we manipulated the distribution of the money within these little miniature societies that we experimentally created. The dot size is proportional to how much money people have. Bigger dots are richer people. And the letter in the dot indicates if they were randomly assigned to be rich, have more money at the beginning, or poor, P, have less money at the beginning. So on the far left, you can see the initial condition in one of the branches of the experiment, and we measured the inequality was assigned to be 0.4. That's the Gini coefficient. That's a very high level of inequality. Scandinavia might have 0.2. We in our society have 0.4. And then they started playing the game. Here on the left-hand side, they could not see anyone else's wealth. They just knew their own wealth. And if you look by the end of the experiment, 10 rounds later, we color the dots blue if people are cooperating with their neighbors, otherwise red. You can see that every dot has gotten big. People are all getting rich. Most of the dots are blue. Most people are cooperating with their neighbors. And the Gini has fallen from 0.41 to 0.14. So much more equality in this society. In the other branch of the experiment, we flipped a switch, and now we made it possible for people to see their neighbor's wealth. And in this branch of the experiment, you see that none of those positive outcomes obtained. The Gini coefficient, the inequality stays high. Most of the people are red defectors, and not as many people become wealthy. So what we found was that it was the visibility of wealth, not the inequality of wealth, that was corrosive to the ability of these groups of people to work together and cooperate with each other in this experiment. Now, we then also looked at a variety of other outcomes. I won't go into them. Here on the x-axis is rounds of the experiment. On the y-axis is the proportion of people cooperating with their neighbors. There were 6 different treatments in this experiment. The dotted lines are the invisible condition. The solid lines are the visible condition. The colors indicate the amount of inequality we experimentally created at the beginning. And as you can see here, all the invisible conditions had higher levels of cooperation compared to lower. Now, when I was in high school, I thought that school uniforms were ridiculous and fascistic. I was like really opposed to the notion of school uniforms. But if you think about it, school uniforms are a kind of invisibility cloak, right? They prevent invidious comparisons of wealth between individuals. So after I did this experiment, my thinking began to change about the corrosive nature of, for example, social media, where you can compare yourself and see what everyone else is experiencing. In a follow-up experiment that was published more recently, in addition to having the people play various things in this game that I just alluded to, we also had them rate how happy they were, their subjective well-being at every round of the experiment. And what we found was that, so in this shows, I don't know, there were 1,200 subjects that were randomly assigned to 100 groups here. The circle size represents the relative wealth, and the color indicates the subjective well-being. The light pink is bad, the gray is neutral, the light blue is good, and the blue is very good. So the blue people are happy here, and the pink people are sad. And what we find is that there's much more happiness, despite any inequality, when in the invisible condition. So it's an extension of the experiment I just showed you, where we now don't just measure cooperation, we measure how people think about the experience that they are having. Those are 2 experiments. I'm going to show you one more, and then I'll close. Because I want to highlight a completely different line of work that's of possible relevance today, that's very new in my laboratory, and that has to do with our sense of smell. So I've become obsessed lately with human social chemosignaling. And there are many functions of human olfaction. We use them to detect predators and prey and foodstuffs and toxins and dangers like fire and tar and so on in the environment. But we also use them for social reasons, to detect mates or other people's emotions, you know, the smell of fear, right? There was a wonderful study done in Germany where they, in a movie theater, they had a movie, and occasionally there would be frightening scenes in the movie, and they collected all the air coming out of the theater, and they could tell by the volatile organic compounds being emitted by everyone in the audience when the fearful scenes were on the movie. Or you can detect other people's behaviors, or you can use it, my lab has shown, to detect your friends. Moreover, we evolved not only the capacity to smell, but also the complementary capacity to emit odors. And these odors arise from the volatile organic compounds that emanate from our body in our breath, in our skin, and our urine, actually. And our genes, and our foodstuffs, and our health status, and our microbiome, and our environment, and our physical and mental and behavioral state all contribute to our odor. You smell differently when you're happy than when you're not happy. And in fact, particular chemical signals, specific volatile organic compounds, which are mostly still ill-defined, could function as subliminal or conscious level to modulate social interactions of various kinds. So this is someone else's work. It's really clever and nice work, and I love this project. And it illustrates very powerfully the point I'm trying to make today. So do you guys know that smell of a newborn baby? It's just intoxicating, right? You put your nose in the baby's scalp, and it just, oh, it makes you feel so good, and you're holding this little thing. Well, it turns out that a key constituent of newborn baby scalp odor is an odorless compound called hexadecanol, a 16-hydrocarbon chemical. And in this experiment, what they did is they exposed men and women to hexadecanol or saline, and then they measured their serum testosterone, and they measured how aggressive they were in a model system where they could blast a loud noise at someone they disliked. And they found that when men were exposed to hexadecanol, their serum testosterone went down and their aggressiveness went down. And when women were exposed to hexadecanol, their serum testosterone went up and their protectiveness went up. The reason I'm giving you this example is that we humans evolved so that in our most vulnerable state, when we're infants, we emit a chemical that changes the social behavior of the people around us. And this is lost in online interactions. Right? So I think a key thing that's happening online, I don't think it's the major thing, I don't think it's a huge thing, but I think it is a minor thing that is a problem, is that when you interact with people, you get the visual and auditory cues, but you don't get the olfactory cues in online social interactions. Now, we have a huge project in my lab that was just funded by the Nomis Foundation and other funders, including the Pershing Square Foundation and Paul Graham and Rothberg Catalyzer. I need to acknowledge all our funders because I'm very grateful. A huge, difficult project. We're working in these isolated villages in Honduras. We're mapping the social interactions in these villages. We've been doing it for 10 years now. And now we're also collecting, we're having them do state-of-the-art measure. The state-of-the-art way you measure how good someone can smell, believe it or not, is a scratch and sniff test. And so we're doing scratch and sniff tests in these people. We're measuring their olfactory genes. We're also collecting their body odors in various ways. They're rubbing little silicone cylinders. We're putting them in tents. We're doing all of this stuff. We're developing an AI nose. And here are some unpublished results from this study which show two networks, two village networks. So these are, this is the first such work, to my knowledge, that's ever been done, where we co-map social interactions and overlay human olfactory capacity. And so here, the green dots are people who have normosmia. They smell normally. The orange dots have microsmia. They have some decrement. And the red dots are people who are anosmic, can't smell. And their perceptiveness, their signal intensity, is shown in the size of the dots. And you can look at this image and you can see that people with different olfactory capacities are in different locations in the social network. So olfaction is linked to sociality. Now, how much time have I used up? I've lost track. I have one more idea. One more idea and then I'll stop. Okay, so that's just a little taste of three findings: inequality, visibility, subjective well-being, network of happiness, how there are clusters of happy people in networks, a little role of olfaction. Let me close with one final idea and then I'll sit down. Consider these two objects. They are both made of carbon. And as we all learned in high school chemistry, the reason has to do with the connections of the carbon atoms. Take the carbon atoms and connect them one way, you get graphite, which is soft and dark. Take the same carbon atoms and connect them another way, you get diamond, which is hard and clear. And there are two key intellectual ideas here. First of all, these properties of softness and darkness and hardness and clearness are not properties of the carbon atoms, they are properties of the collection of carbon atoms. And second, which properties you get depends on how you connect the carbon atoms to each other. Take the same carbon atoms and connect them one way, you get one set of properties. Connect them another way, you get a completely different set of properties. And it's the same with human groups. You can take a group of people and connect them one way, and they are happy and productive and wealthy and cooperative and healthy. Or you take the same people and connect them a different way, and they are unhappy and unproductive and poor and unhealthy. So these properties, for example, of happiness are not just properties of individuals, they are properties of collection of individuals that emerge and that have to do with the structure of how people are connected to each other. It's the ties between people that make the whole greater than the sum of its parts. New properties can emerge, including happiness, and spread because of the connections, because of the ties between people, and not necessarily solely because of the people themselves. In fact, our experience of the world depends on the structure and function of the social networks around us, near and far. Thank you very much.
I'm going to Nick, I want to ask you something. I think that was fascinating. I just had a couple of thoughts. Obviously, the first question, in a sense, is there something special about the young? I mean, the sense you've talked about, you know, these relationships and these patterns. You might think that these have special effects for the young, and I'm just trying to get you to connect to that. And we're going to talk tomorrow, and neuroscientists, in some sense related to what you're doing, are talking about the fact that, okay, children are not sitting talking as we are. They're not talking to each other. They're not smelling in the way that you say. And the arguments I've been reading and talking to people suggest that actually this is having an impact on brain development. So the question, in a sense, about your research, is there something special about being young and not doing that? So think about it. You have an olfactory thing and you respond to it. But just think about, you're 12 and you're 13 and you're 14. Yeah. You're not sitting and doing as we are, talking to each other. And so the danger is that all the things you've talked about might be especially bad when you're young, just as not sitting, talking to each other has bad effects on their brain. These are huge questions, but I think it's really important. Yeah, and I hadn't had it before, but my mind is flashing to a couple of thoughts. So first of all, we all know that our odor varies with age, right? Right. So, you know, babies smell nicer than teenagers who smell nicer than... You smell okay, mate. It's okay. Exactly. You're okay. Old people, you know. But I think that
the odors we emit and our olfaction are distinct. And I think that you're
Yes.
absolutely, the hypothesis
Kids have
you
got to
just put on
learn
the
it.
table. Yes. So there turns out that there are key moments in our lives. Like,
Right.
so babies explore the world with their mouths,
Right.
which also is a chemo signal, right? They taste things. And teenagers, there's something called the operational sex ratio in evolutionary biology, which is the ratio of opposite sex individuals in the population when you reach sexual maturity. This isn't just in humans, it's also in all animals. This is an issue. And it's very stressful to be the minority sex in a sex asymmetric
Right.
population.
Right.
And other work that we've done shows that boys who go to high schools where there are fewer boys per girl have a higher risk of death for the rest of their lives.
Right.
It's very stressful to be a boy and have to compete with many other boys. I'm sorry, if there are more boys than girls. So if there are like 80 boys and 20 girls in your high school, that's stressful to you and it marks you for life in this paper that we and others, we started this work and others have done it. I think the same thing could be happening with olfaction.
Right.
That
Right.
in other words, at this critical moment in adolescence when the teenage brain is supposed to be able to start detecting sexual opportunities using odor, which, by the way, women rate the man's, in heterosexual couples, women rate the man's odor as one of the top 3 features in whether they will get romantically involved with him. Men are a bit less, more tolerant,
Or desperate.
but it's very important, I think.
Right.
So it could be the case. It could be
Yes.
tested, this idea.
I have another thought. We did work on Native American well-being, which of course is the worst of any racial group. And we were asked to go and think about which Native Americans actually had the biggest problems. We have problems of low life expectancy and so on. And we found the evidence actually was their well-being was better the more people like them they were around. So in states where there were lots of Native Americans, the Native Americans felt better. But in places where there weren't Native Americans like them, they didn't feel better. But you might think this, I'm not sure quite, but actually being around people like you turns out, and in terms of where people want to live in their dorms and so on, I'm just trying to think of the implications of what you've done. The evidence is clearly that the Native Americans who leave the reservation are least happy.
There's a literature in evolutionary biology which is, so there are these many features that we humans manifest, which I've called the social suite, which is a suite of 8 features that we express outside our bodies and that work to bind us together. For example, love is such a feature. I'm not interested in whether you love yourself. I'm interested in whether you love others. Cooperation is such a feature. You can't cooperate yourself. You cooperate with others. Friendship is such a feature. Teaching is such a feature. You teach someone else things. But one of the key features that we all have, which is very depressing, is something called in-group bias, which is that we prefer the company of people like us. And there's this interesting literature in evolutionary biology, and actually there's a scientist at Dartmouth, Feng Fu, in the applied math department, who's one of the world leaders in this set of ideas, which has to do with why we have in-group bias. I mean, why do we prefer the company of people we resemble? And by the way, elephants have the same thing, and dolphins, other large social mammals have the same predilection that David just put on the table. So why is that? And the ideas have to do with that it's easier for us to evolve to be a cooperative species when we form these preferences, when we form the ability to distinguish us versus them. I'll take less than a minute, and I'll give you an example. So imagine I told you there are 1,000 of you in this audience, and I said, go out and be nice to everyone. So mix among yourselves and just treat each other altruistically and kindly and nicely. This is an overwhelming task that I've just given you, and you would be very tempted not to be nice to other people. Why should I be nice to you? I might never see you again. There are 1,000 other people. Or even if I saw you, I might not recognize you because there are just so many other people. So there's very difficult to be nice to each other in large groups. Now imagine if instead I divided you into 10 groups of 100 and I gave you flags that have orange or purple or green flags. And now I said to you, just be nice to people holding your color flag.
Right.
All of you should immediately have the instinctual, oh, that's so much easier. I'll just be nice to my group of people, right? And actually the overall rate of cooperation in the group of 1,000 will be higher when you endow the group with what is called adding structure to the population. When you add structure to the population by dividing it into 10 groups of 100, the overall rate of cooperation can go up. Now this is a huge topic, and it's very depressing because, like, why there's a big difference between loving your own group and being indifferent to other groups, or saying that other groups need to be enslaved or put into ovens, right? Which we also do. And so that's one of the big unanswered questions is, why do we then go beyond indifference to other groups to killing other groups? And that's for another
Do you think you could say, and I mean, go back to our earlier discussion, we actually are really seriously thinking about the students come and we're going to assign them to dorm mates. Is there anything you could say about who should we allocate them to? I mean, should we randomly allocate them? Should we allocate them to people like them? Is there anything we learn from your work which tells us about the algorithm?
You have to make a trade-off.
Of course.
I think they would be, the overall level. Well, they're different. Jesus, that's a huge topic. And Bruce Sacerdote, who you mentioned, is of course here and an expert on this topic. But my read, and Bruce can correct me if I'm wrong, my read of the so-called contact theory research, so there have been these experiments, for example, done with a Christian and Muslim, I think I get this right, in Iraq, this famous paper where soccer leagues were set up to try to reduce inter-ethnic conflict by having young people play soccer with each other, or random assignment of roommates. But my understanding, and I could be wrong about this, is that the depressing conclusion from this research is that when you facilitate contact between groups defined by religion or ethnicity or whatever the division is, you do reduce the opprobrium with which the ego feels towards the altar. In other words, like if I'm given a black roommate, I'm now am not as racist against black people because I now have a black roommate. But the sad part of that is that it just applies to my black roommate. Like I think he's a good guy. But it doesn't necessarily reduce racial prejudice as a whole. Now, I think that's probably a very simplistic summary to people who know that
I think
with
Bruce
research.
in the end kind of comes around to let's just randomly assign them and then we can look, right?
Yes,
I mean,
well,
there's
I think
not
that
an
would be a
obvious
great
set of
experiment.
rules. Random assignment is fine and then we'll work out what works, right? Test them at the beginning. I don't know. Okay, this is great. Loneliness, because they don't
No,
they
I'm gonna
don't
take this.
contact together enough.
I'm suddenly very conscious of how I smell.
You're good, man.
won't
Honestly,
tell you.
you're good, man. So far, so good.
Promise to tell me, right? All right.
Thank you. That's great.
Let's see. Okay. Well, I'm a little bit of an outlier in the group. I'm a historian, and I work on the history of human happiness, well-being, flourishing, which is great, but it poses a challenge of data collection because it turns out that the dead are not all that willing to answer questionnaires. You can send them a Cantrell survey and they just don't respond, which is rude, but there you have it. So what do we do? Well, one of the things that we do is what this man, the Marquis de Chastellux, did. He has the honor of being the first historian of happiness, of public happiness, and essentially he used proxy data. He said reasonably enough that slavery was not conducive to happiness or warfare or starvation, and robust harvests and robust commerce and sociability are, and there you have it. His criteria were a little bit crude, but I think you get the general idea, and we continue to do something similar today. The three of us have been asked to think about precedents, precursors, a kind of deeper historical context to the crisis in youth well-being today. And I think it's clear, and we heard a little bit this morning, that loneliness, what the philosopher Rebecca Goldstein calls the experience of connectedness eluding us, I think it's clear that loneliness is not only an important proxy, but it's a central part of the problem. It's described increasingly, as you know, including by our Surgeon Generals, as an epidemic or a pandemic. But it turns out it's a little bit of an older problem. And I want to just say a few words in what follows about the deeper history of loneliness with an eye to our present discontents. Because we know, and many people in this room have documented the fact, that just like Chastellux's slavery or warfare, loneliness is bad for human beings. Right? We are the social creature par excellence, and if you keep us away from others for too long, it has massively negative effects on our health and our well-being. What's less appreciated, so that's well known, but I think what's less appreciated is that loneliness is less of a universal human condition, observable in all times and all places, and more of a recent historical phenomena. Now, we could qualify that, but the broad takeaway from the work of historians of emotions is that loneliness, both as a word and as a social concern, is a relatively recent development that only begins to register in any meaningful way towards the very end of the 18th century. And this is just a simple Google engram, but there are other ways of documenting that. Prior to that point, people spoke not so much about loneliness, but about solitude. The great humanist Petrarch in the 14th century writes a treatise on solitude, De Vita Solitaria, and many others do too, including this important work by Johann Georg Zimmermann, which is translated into English and many other languages. And what's interesting about this older literature on solitude is that by and large, people talk about solitude as a good thing. Right? It's a source of rejuvenation and renewal, spiritual growth, a kind of calm. Right? Now, you could have too much solitude, and indeed, the man, Robert Burton, shown in this picture here, the author of The Anatomy of Melancholy from the early 17th century, speaks of the solitude that undoeth us. Right, the solitude of the monk who flagellates himself in a cell, spends too long apart, the prisoner in solitary confinement, or indeed the scholar who spends too much time alone with their books. And yet, on the whole, solitude in this older literature is given a positive emotional valence, largely, I think, because deep social connection, whether you wanted it or not, was the overwhelming and near inescapable norm. Solitude then was a way of leavening the sociality of family and community. It provided a respite from the many ties that otherwise bound us to the world. Well, that begins to change in the 19th century for a variety of complex reasons, including changes in family structure, social and geographic mobility, urbanization, the onset of industrialization and capitalism. And one index of that change is the rise in solitary living. Until the 19th century, and in many parts of the world into the 20th, only about 5% of all households globally contain just one person. And you can see that starts to rise towards the end of the 19th century, so that today large numbers of people, particularly in the global north, large percentages of populations live by themselves. Now, loneliness and living alone are not, of course, the same thing. You can be lonely in a crowd and you can be happy on your own. But there's strong correlations nonetheless, and I think in many cases causality. Moreover, even when people don't live alone, increasingly they live in greater isolation. And you can show this spatially over time by looking at floor plans and the kind of placement of rooms and the layout of homes and the like. Right? Where brothers and sisters once slept in the same room or even the same bed as their parents, then over time they sleep together in bunks, and finally, increasingly, they have rooms and spaces of their own with doors that lock and close. We could trace that too, and it would underline the point that physical isolation is a consequence of wealth and development, as well as of choice. People, that is, initially choose to live by themselves because it's a luxury, very much like people once treated solitude as a luxury in a time of ubiquitous social connection. And I think we could say something similar about the rise of the use of smartphones and social media, which are, of course, products of affluence and, at least initially, chosen quite freely, but that have, as we know, been accompanied by a precipitous rise in loneliness. There are many prescient observers who began to register the social consequences of loneliness in the 19th and 20th centuries. They call it different things. Anomie or alienation, atomism, the movement from Gemeinschaft to Gesellschaft, or from organic to mechanical solidarity. But one of the most observant in my mind is this man, Alexis de Tocqueville, who discusses in the first half of the 19th century the rise of what he calls homo solus. Right? and sees loneliness as a consequence not only of increasing prosperity, but of the pronounced individualism of democratic ages, which cuts each man, as he puts it, off from his contemporaries and threatens ultimately to imprison us in the loneliness of our own hearts. Now, it's important to appreciate that Tocqueville doesn't just give up on democracy, far from it, and indeed he sees forces at work within democratic societies that can counteract this movement towards atomism and loneliness. And one of the keys in his view is what he calls voluntary associations, what Professor Putnam would call clubs, and it's important, I think, to continue to cultivate them, but we're going to need more than just that. Because the broad point I want to leave you with is that we're battling here against some pretty deep forces, right? Endemic not just to recent times, the rise of COVID or of the smartphone, although clearly exacerbated by them. But loneliness, in truth, is an unanticipated consequence of development and a certain kind of progress, which makes battling it all the more challenging and all the more pressing. If solitude long ago was a respite from overbearing social connection today must be the respite and cure for loneliness and the unhappiness it brings. The good news is that increasingly, I think, we understand this. And so the question becomes our question, right? How best can we build upon the connections we have, retain those we are losing, and foster new ones for the future in the face of powerful forces that militate against them?
Let me try a thought on you. So the rise in single-person households particularly relates to older folk, many of whom are living in very large houses. And obviously we've seen this rise in loneliness of the young. But here's a statistic which sort of stands against it, and we can set this together. If you go back to pre the Great Recession, the proportion of 26-year-olds in the United States who lived with their parents was some small number. And the places in the world where it was really high were in countries that didn't have functioning housing markets, so Greece and Spain particularly. If you look at the phenomenon today, the lonely young people are not breaking out on their own into new households, into new individual households. They're in the basement with mom. So the loneliness is not, they don't want to be lonely. They'd like to go off into single households. And some of the story we have is that loneliness is actually that they're in the basement, perhaps not from their own choosing. Another part which we have actually talked about is that many of the people, say their peers, have houses that they can afford with a 2% mortgage that they took out in 2017, and today it's 7% and they can't afford it. So the story, in some sense, I'm asking you to think about is the fact that there's single households, as 75, 85-year-olds are living in large houses, but the young are actually solitude and lonely because they can't get out to single households. You see the point where I'm going
Well,
with
maybe,
this?
yeah. But of course, I mean, you put your finger on my answer to the question, and that's they're living in the basement. I mean, my son lives on the other side of the house. His girlfriend comes and goes. He comes and goes. I often don't even see him. Now, we work hard to try to counteract that, but the point is that you can live physically right next to somebody, but in a separate room, cut off, plugged into the internet, and not have the kind of social
Don't you think as a society, I always think part of the function of the coming to Dartmouth is you're going to ease the transition from school to work. You're going to go, eventually you're going to leave here, you're going to go somewhere different to your parents, and you're going to set up another household. And the household formation process has stopped because of that. They're not, maybe they are a new house, but it's not a new household.
Yeah, so
I don't know.
One other, thing that I find interesting is that if you the slide I showed on the increase in single households, it's most pronounced in Scandinavia.
Yeah.
And there you have this phenomenon where people are living on their own.
Right.
But then now sort of organizing communal associations so that they can take care of each other's kids, they can have barbecues in the courtyard and do things to overcome that. And I think that's crucial too. I mean, one of the things we haven't talked about yet, but I think it's absolutely central to the question of well-being, both in university spaces and in society at large, is the kind of urban planning that goes into thinking about how you get people moving and acting together. And I think, I didn't bring this data, but it's really interesting to look at what happens to housing plans over the course of the 19th century. And
right.
I mean, when I talk to my parents, my dad slept in the same room with all his brothers, all 5 of them, and they listened to the radio together and they read their comics together and told us, and that had a positive consequence.
Lonely.
Exactly. And then what happens? Well, we get richer, and yes, because choice, people want to move. They want to move out. We get more homes. We get more rooms, and they're more divided. And they don't interact
in a sense,
and
I'm
communicate as
sort of
much.
saying perhaps they're lonely in a crowd. Is that
Yeah.
now what's going on? Before they were together, I mean, they're together, they're in the same house. You happen to have told me a different arrangement, but 10 years ago, they wouldn't be in the basement. They'd have set off to another place.
Sure. I mean, we could say something about urbanization too, right?
Yes.
You get more and more people coming to cities and feeling lonely in the midst of millions of people. And that has to do with the breakup of networks and so forth.
Do you want to talk a little bit, because you and I have talked a bit about this. I mean, there are things in the past, right? So think of the Industrial Revolution or something, and people moved to the towns. I mean, there's stories there, right? We can draw from history. You want to talk a little bit about, you and I have talked a bit about it, but people come from the rural areas to the towns, from a plenty to not a plenty, and then they're isolated, and then, right?
Well, exactly. And what do they leave? They leave their communities, their
Yes.
voluntary associations,
Yes.
their churches, their family networks, their clients, and they're on their own and atomized increasingly. And of course, this is a huge, huge issue.
Thank you. And we're all going to chat in a minute, but each person, please.
Great, thanks.
Thank you.
Great.
And I love the Institute for Sustained Attention. We are going to sustain our attention, honestly.
I hope so. I mean, maybe we need a stretch break. I'll go quick.
No.
Huge pleasure to be here. Thanks very much for the invitation. I'm going to quickly tell you some disclosures. I'm an academic historian of science. So Darrin and I have known each other for a long time. I do the history of science, technology, and medicine. And I've been working for the last 10 years or so on a history of the laboratory study of human attention. So how did human attention get sliced and diced in laboratories from sort of 1880 to 1980, let's say, en route to being priced in our intensive attention economy? And when you see me talk about human fracking, what you're seeing me talk about is the attention economy. I think it's a better way of talking about it.
The lack of attention economy?
Well, let's get there and see just what we mean by attention. So quickly, I do academic history of science, and then for the last 10 years, I've run a nonprofit that focuses on the shifting character of our attentional lives in relation to societal scale digital networks. And I'll talk a little bit about that work too. So I want to try to do 3 things just in the 10 or 12 minutes we've got here. First, I want to take us back and examine the kind of laboratory research that gave shape to the understandings of human attention that are familiar to us now. So what is human attention? The kind of thing that is being studied in neuroscience labs right on this campus or in the labs of experimental psychologists. How did we get to that way of thinking about attention? Since from the morning in the first session, that remarkable session with the Surgeons General, such an intense focus on how one of the things that's going on is clearly shifts in our attentional experience of ourselves, of our relations with others, and with our relations to the world. And I'm going to make a claim that way we feel now about our attentional lives, that there's a genealogy, that we can see kind of how we came to this point. So I'm going to try to do that super quick. Then I'm going to sort of dig in on what do we mean by human fracking? Like, what does it mean to commodify attention, to turn attention into money, to have this immaterial form of labor, to turn attention into money, and the role that that particular business model plays in what are now the 6 largest corporations by market cap on the planet, team. You could do the names of those companies, and each one of those companies, Meta, Apple, Alphabet, NVIDIA, which makes the chips that make the systems possible that run the time-on device maximizing algorithms. All 6 of those companies, $17 trillion in market cap. That's half of the US GDP, have as their primary business model. A literal, historically unprecedented gold rush into the terra nullius of human consciousness, which now you can bank. You can source it and you can turn it into cash money. And you literally could not do that 15 years ago. So when Jonathan Haidt talks about, wait a second, we see something going on here and it doesn't look good, what we're talking about is the emergence of human fracking. And I think it's really important to be clear, you know, one of the sort of moments in the first couple of sessions where I was like, there's like something we're not kind of quite seeing here, is everybody recognizes that these social scale digital networks are connecting human beings like never before, team, right? I mean, that's real. So the disconnection, loneliness, anomie, and anguish is kind of hard to square with systems that facially connect us great. And we saw moments where people tried to kind of square that circle. It's sort of like, there's a big problem here. We're all like really lonely and miserable and depressed, kids especially. But then somebody will show up and be like, it's kind of weird that actually a lot of kids really like sending like, you know, communication with all their friends in these systems. Are you guys noticing that? Here's the thing. The problem's not the technology. I'm in favor of banning phones in schools, okay? But the problem's not phones. The problem's not social media, whatever that means. The problem is a business model that quite literally fracks human beings. Fracks. And we gotta like say that. You don't have to be like, I'm not a Marxist. We're not just calling out all of capitalism here. We're talking about a very specific model of capitalism. New technologies make possible new forms of exploitation. Steam engines. Not bad in and of themselves, hey, right? But did they make possible new forms of exploitation in which people were pushed to the threshold of survivability because of brutal expropriation of their labor? They sure did, right? Problem was not steam engines. Problem was the satanic mills of Lancashire and what it means to do people dirty in the interests of turning them into money. And all we have here, everybody, is a new technology that's making possible a new form of exploitation of human beings, and we are all the victims. And we have to start saying that much more clearly. Problem's not social media. If we were running social media for love and truth and mutual understanding, it'd be really cool, actually, right? And ditto, your phone, which is not a phone, hey, right? It's like an unbelievably powerful computer, which is also a cognitive prosthetic, which is an access to the manifold of the all. So to call it a phone is kind of like odd. Okay, I mean, it's also a powerful technology for radical surveillance at all scales, corporate and state-sponsored. But whatever it is, that thing you got there, it's not itself like bad. It's actually freaking amazing, right? And if, again, it had been engineered by a community of Buddhist monks with an interest in giving us access to transcendence, we'd probably all be really grooving. It wasn't, though. It was built by people who tried to figure out how to make money, because that's a thing people do, and then within the framework of an essentially unregulated space, identified a basic way that you can make money from people by commodifying their consciousness. It's a land grab into a new terra nullius called human consciousness. And it, just like in the 16th and 17th century, the world was redefined as open ground and everybody went for it to grab it. And it took us a while to be like, oh, that was really horrible what we did there. We're doing it again, but we're doing it inside the brains of every human on Earth. And I don't even want to say brain, because brain's like too limited. It's like It's the experience of personhood. It's consciousness. Because when you commodify attention, what you're commodifying is care, interest, love. You're commodifying the most essential indices of our being. And that leaves people feeling really queasy. I've gotten a little ahead of myself. I'm going to get, by finishing, by saying, like, I'm going to finish by reminding you all that you all already know everything I just said. Like, I've told you nothing new. The whole world literally knows this. At this point, what is it? Like smartphone penetration at the global scale is something like, it's nearly 80% of the global population now, right, is in possession of these devices. And everybody knows that they're being driven by a commodification of human attention model, like everyone. So I've given you no new information. The diagnosis of the problem is ubiquitous. The problem is, what do we do? And the answer, it's going to be, again, so painfully simple, but I'll finish on it, is it's not going to be solved by pharmaceuticals. Okay? You're not going to give people a pill, although we are giving people pills to work on this problem, but that's not going to solve it. And regulation itself, we've already heard, like, unlikely to be successful right away, hey? Because the interest groups are in possession of all the forces of governance, full and complete. The only thing that's going to save us is us. When we achieve collective solidarity and move the nature of our experience of being together, we have to come together. And that's what we call attention activism. And this is going to happen. There have been large-scale changes like this before. The Industrial Revolution has already come up. It's a great one because the same technologies that were instrumental in reducing human beings to their labor value, which was really bad for humans, actually created the conditions of possibility for a radical new kind of politics, right? People reduced to their labor value discovered that they had a new kind of power in relation to capital. It was called unions, trade unionism, and labor politics. I will argue for you by the end of this in about a minute and a half that we are likely to see a similar scale revolution in the experience of political subjectivity over the next 10 years, meaning these new systems have reduced us to homo attentis, where all that's anyone wants from us is our attention. And once we wake up and are like, actually, you know what? It's interesting you're so interested in that. It's actually mine, and I constitute my being and my relationship to others out of it, and we're going to take it back from you. Our actual politics is going to change in ways we can't even yet imagine. Okay, I'm going to go super fast and just say a few quick things. I mean, this I can't do for you in any detail, but this is the book that's about the history of the laboratory study of attention. I'll show you cool pictures, but the upshot is this. The study of attention in laboratories in the 20th century was an instrument-based study of the human ability to respond to stimuli in cybernetic settings. It was primarily funded by the military-industrial complex, which was interested in tracking and triggering within the systems of anti-aircraft warfare and screen vigilance to radar. So to make it real simple, human attention is many things. Daydreaming, staring out the window, having a reverie, taking care of your child, smelling the scalp of your infant. Those are all attentional activities. They are inextricable from the human experience of sensation and cognition. The thing we all spend our time worrying about when we're like, oh, my attention span's completely screwed up, is an extremely narrow tracking and triggering cybernetic vigilance. And is that attention? Sure. You can quantify it. It's extremely interesting because you can operationalize it in machinic settings, but it is like, it's such a small part of the human attentional capacities. The upshot of this book, which is a relatively tedious academic book that comes out of 10 years of archival research in laboratory like notebooks, is basically attention was sliced and diced in a relatively narrow instrumental operational way en route to, and in a way that set the conditions of possibility for, attention being priced in the marketplace. So one of the ways we can protect ourselves is to remind ourselves how many other things are attentional. These folks are aviation pilots being put through rebreathers and gradually deoxygenated as they played early video games. And this was sort of how human attention was being assessed for the capacities of aviators in the 1930s and 40s. These are the systems for testing people's ability to monitor radar screens. I want to get to the punchline at the end of this because we don't have time to do all this because I've talked too much quickly. What's human fracking? Human fracking is, the perfect analogy is petroleum fracking. Petroleum fracking is not just getting oil up out of the ground because you drill a hole and it gushes up. There aren't any places where that happens anymore. We got all that oil. Petroleum fracking is pumping down into the surface of the earth high pressure, high volume detergents, which crack tectonic structures to give access to widely distributed low density hydrocarbons, which then are forced back up to the surface by the pump down, and then you kind of take this nasty spume and separate out the detergent off stuff, and you get your oil and gas out of it. It's exactly the way that the primary business model of our attention economy works. The pumping into our faces of high pressure, high volume detergents to crack up our durational experiences of attention and in effect destabilize the deep architecture of human consciousness in order to force to the surface a monetizable spume of attention, which is continuously auctioned to the highest bidder, as we all know. The damage that these two forms of resource extraction cause, exactly parallel, again, micro earthquakes continuously, psychic disturbance, and wide-scale surface level pollution. So AI, briefly, only makes this worse, of course. And how much worse does it make it? Well, as you understand, the question is dark flow. It's keeping people time on device, TOD, right? Because that's what you can auction. And TOD is also the German word for death, as Darrin knows well. So that's like a little note there on the side. These systems, amazing. AI, incredible. Already, these super smart systems that easily defeat us at Go and all other games are being applied to the basic problem that interests everyone, which is how to turn human beings into money. And they're succeeding. And when you try to understand why like half of the Earth's population is spending 7 or 8 hours a day staring at small screens of glass, which is not in line with our evolutionary history, it was very difficult to get complex physical organisms to stare at a small screen of black glass for 7 or 8 hours. But they've succeeded in getting us to do that, and they've succeeded in getting us to do it by means of the application of extremely clever algorithms that study our behavior, collect all of the available data on us, and then deploy that to ensure that whatever comes up next is what we most want to see. What can be done? We just have to say no to this. And the kind of work that Haidt's doing is key, and Gene and others, it's all good. Yes, keep the phones away from the kids because we can't regulate the way they operate at present. Keep them out of schools. But there's all the rest of us. The kids are the problem, but actually their parents are the real problem. The kids are being acculturated into these systems by us, by their grandparents, who are completely hopeless, right? How many of you have grandparents who can't get off their phones, right? This is the real problem. It's gonna take actual collective action, which we don't have yet. And so the moment now is exactly like the moment in 1961 or whatever, where there was no environmental movement. And 10 years later, right, there was an actual coalition, highly diverse, duck hunters, folks at Alcoa, hippies. We need that. Everybody coming together to say, you can't do this to us. 3 pillars of attention activism as we see it: study, organizing, and what we call sanctuary, which has already come up a number of times. And I would say that our nonprofit is there's lots of different people working on this in different ways. Allies, friends. If you're involved in some of this work and you see yourself as an ally, please introduce yourself and let me know, because we're trying to build coalition in this sort of work. They're the OGs and the forefighters in this work. Tristan Harris, Center for Humane Technology, lots of folks, all right? So we're all, Jenny Odell, Tim Wu, James Williams, millions of people. What are we doing? We built a school in Brooklyn. It's a bricks and mortar school. Come and visit. This is all we do. And it's an amazing staff of incredible people. We do classes, we do free labs. This is all nonprofit work. A number of the folks involved are my former students, because I teach at Princeton a course on the history of attention, and I do what I'm doing now with you, like Mondays, Wednesdays, and Fridays for the fall and the spring semester. Sanctuary, we've published some peer-reviewed stuff on this. We believe deeply that it is essential to create protected spaces. And we heard the Surgeon Generals talking about this, others. In a sense, that's what it means to take the phones out of the schools, to create sanctuary spaces. What's most important to us is that we all have to go to the work now collectively of making those decisions. When you're family, you have to decide how you're going to be in relation to each other when. In your workplaces, you have to decide this. This is like a social practice that needs to emerge and transform the ways we gather and attend to each other. I'm thinking Priya Parker, her wonderful book, Why We Gather. So sanctuary, key, and then organizing. And here I do, I'm going to go ahead and just put in a pitch. We have a book coming out. It's collectively authored, very unusual, written by more than 20 people in this coalition called the Friends of Attention. And all of our proceeds go to support our nonprofit work. The book, is all about our effort to make these kinds of changes at scale. And I'm we credited some funders. The Omidyar Foundation just gave us some very significant backing to link this to a national organizing campaign. We want this to be a kind of authentic silent spring for the revolution that we need. And so would love it if you wanted to get involved. If you have work that you're already doing or work you know that people are doing that links to this kind of stuff, please let us know, because that's the organizing part, which is really key. End human fracking. Now, yes, I have stickers of that. You want a sticker for your laptop? Get me. Thank you.
So we have had an attention revolution, essentially an attention collapse. So I'm an economist. What do you think the economic consequences are of a collapse in attention? I mean, it's really, you made out obviously important stories, and that having attention is good. I mean, we've had negative shocks to economies. Supposing we start to think about an economy gets hit by a negative attention disorder or something. Can we think about what the likely? I mean, you've talked about we have to restore things, but in a sense, the rate of return to that is not going down the path that I'm going down, which is, to what extent is this lack of attention going to generate a negative shock, and in what ways does the lack of attention kind of show itself? Does it make people graduate less? Does it make them? I mean, we talk about less unhappy, but this seems like an enormous story, right? It's like, is it like a virus? Is it, what's the scale of this thing? How big is this thing? If we don't deal with this attention thing in the American economy, and we allow these companies to carry on their model and say we make money out of your lack of attention because you're not going to read a book, you're going to flick through the 3 seconds of TikTok. I mean, the way we have to understand this is, tell me why this is a big deal. I mean, in economic terms. I'm not denying in individual terms.
I just have absolutely nothing to say about that. I mean, I'm just not an economist. So
but you understand this is a good question.
If you're an economist, but it's not. It's actually, I love you, Danny, but it's not a good question if you're a humanist. I'm interested in humans.
That's okay.
I'm interested in humans and economics, which is a very important science.
That's okay.
Like all the sciences are very important. They do all move powerfully from a program of objectified knowledge about objects. And when you treat humans as objects and produce knowledge about them, you can produce a shit ton of knowledge, and it's very cool. I come at it the other way. I'm actually about the subject condition, and the experience of being is not less real than the human as an object of quantifiable knowledge. It's harder to get at, though, and I just stump for that. So I would love to hear economists talk about the question you've just asked, but it's not one I can speak to
Well,
because I've lived my whole life to think
yeah,
about
but I'm
other
just trying to
things.
think about how important should I scale it in my mind? How important, should I move resources to it? I'm just trying to think of it that way. I mean, obviously, part of the story we're thinking about is what do we need to do here, and how do we proceed to do that? And part of it is we need to impose attention, and I'm just trying to put it in my head.
Can I stop?
Yeah, of
I'm
course.
sorry. We don't impose attention. So the thing we do is we work to create space in which people can rewild the experience of attention and remember that they don't want simply to put a screen time monitor on their phone and get back 18 minutes of transactional, operational, always already task-oriented cybernetic attention that they can use for some other task. They don't actually want that. They want to experience flourishing human being, and that will require that they remember that there's a host of other forms of life. So when Jonathan Haidt says, go play outside, that's what he's saying. He's saying, like, indulge in the rich and ineluctable experience of human being, you will be less miserable, and he is correct about that. Does that make sense?
No, that's fine.
Yeah, and the other thing I would say is that we also, I think, need not to make people sort of feel bad or ashamed. A core problem in all of this is that everybody already feels that their attention is like a personal failing problem.
Right.
But all of that makes for a kind of neoliberal architecture of the diagnosis and neoliberal architecture of the solution. If I only had a bit more willpower or better, controls on my phone, I wouldn't have gone down that rabbit hole for 2 hours. No, it's not you. It's a systemic problem. It's structural. What you need are your friends to have good moves on this, which is why we're always very kind of cautious about the phone thing, for instance. I teach at Princeton. I love my Princeton students. They're amazing. Long-form immersive literacy is over, and it's not coming back. So it's not the end of the world. It just means that people like me and Darrin, who actually kind of had the opportunity to be acculturated in the reading of books, need very quickly to learn how to get the parts of the books that we would like people to remain connected to out of the unreadable books and into forms of activity, performance, collective action, quite frankly, new cultures of orality, like the podcast. There's a bazillion ways, people are not actually going to get stupider. I don't even mean on the metrics that we measure them on, they're scoring less well, but people's intellectual capacities and hungers for existence are not going down. We just have to figure out new ways to permit an inherited culture to go forward under conditions in which people have been radically transformed by these technologies.
So so thinking about what you guys have, these two here, what can we say to the folks from the United Nations here around the world? What can we say to them about what we've learned and perhaps what we should do? I mean, this is a big deal. I mean, obviously on the attention front, but what can we say to them? Darrin, you want to go?
So my line here always is that I'm a historian and I know more about predicting the past than the future.
But tell us tell us the stories from the past.
I'm going to pass the microphone to Nick.
No, you can't duck that one.
Well, look, I mean, one of the things I alluded to, clearly voluntary associations, such an important part of American history, of history, full stop. Professor Putnam will talk about this tomorrow, I'm sure. Absolutely key to doing the kind of social cohesion that Nick talks about. And these are important. No, we don't bowl anymore, and that's not a tragedy because people don't bowl anymore, but they can do other things. And I think, Dartmouth does this really well. We have so many clubs, right? And you go to the first week of school and the students, they're being actively recruited. The band's out there in the outdoors and all these people. this is good for human beings. We know this, right? Everything that we can do to support that.
Yeah, absolutely.
At the local level, at the state level, we heard about public parks yesterday, getting students out into nature and doing things together. All these kind of programs are clearly to the good, and they have a track record. I mean, one of the things that Professor Putnam will talk about is, or has talked about, is that some of the same metrics that I was referring to in the 19th century, people were really worried about loneliness and anomie and alienation. And yet we came out the other side of that. And one of the ways we came out the other side of it was doubling down on voluntary associations, doubling down on reconnecting socially. And I think we have that capacity. And I like to say that I'm by nature a pessimist, but I think optimism is a virtue. And I think there's a cause for optimism in the human capacity to reconnect. We know increasingly what the problems are, and so we just got to get out there and join together.
Nick? In the last you can take the last 2 minutes.
No, I don't. I'm only going to communicate one thought, which is just I'm going to return to the carbon metaphor and pick up a little bit on what Graham was also saying, which is that the problem transcends the individuals,
yes.
right? There's a collective feature. So even if every single individual changed their behavior from one thing to another thing, there's still this extra emergent aspect to the problem. So I think we need both individual-focused policies that, yes, it's good, put your phone away, there's nothing wrong with that, but it's not enough for you to put your phone away. It's not going to solve the problem because all these other things that are going on. We did this experiment in Honduras that we just published 6 months ago. So here's the let me see if I can summarize this very quickly. So the usual perspective in a public health or development economics intervention is you go into a developing world village, you find 20 out of 500 women, and you teach them about breastfeeding or taking care of their children's diarrhea or vaccination, and then you come back a year later and you assess what fraction of those women have adopted the knowledge or attitudes or behaviors you're trying to get them to change. But that's not what I'm interested in. I'm not interested in response to treatment among the treated. I'm interested in response to treatment among the untreated. I want to know, what does everyone else in the village do when you teach these 20 women out of 500 women this thing? And the flip side of that is that when you go into a village and you teach, this is a very subtle econometric issue. When you go into a village and you teach 20 women out of 500 women how to breastfeed their kids, the treatment is not actually that I gave you the education, it's that I gave you plus 19 other people the education. So the effect in you is a compound effect of what I've done to you and what I've done to everyone else around you. And I think that seeing social contagion in this way, beginning to open your eyes to the ways in which the whole is greater than the sum of its parts, is going to be a key aspect of our public policy going forward as we address the issues we've been discussing today.
And that, I mean, go back to my economics thing, that actually turns out to be a big part of the story of things like unemployment. And what you see is unemployment lowers the well-being of the people who are unemployed, but it also lowers the well-being of the people who are not unemployed. Yes. And that's a really big deal. And the weight of that, there's the weight of this group, but everybody else is hurt by it. So it's the same kind of story. Yes. And we're well aware of, in a sense, that is a social contagion, but sometimes it can work to the good, right? It can also work to the good. Fantastic, everybody. Thank you so much for coming. Great to hear from you. Woo! Good job, guys. Thank you. And now we take 5 minutes or so, and then we're going to go to talking about test scores, I believe. Can I give you that? I don't want to roll.